some of the photographs associated with this. My first thought when I saw that was that when Al was cleaning this up, that he got, as I sometimes do, got a little impatient. The cast wasn't completely cured yet, it was still a little green, and as he was scraping the mud out from the between the toes, like the difference between the crew cast and when Titmus was holding it, someone had taken some care and cleaned that out, that he might have scored that plaster, and in so doing revealed the white plaster underneath. Or the other possibility that someone brought up last night was that the toe had kind of wrapped over a twig, and in removing that twig, it had removed some of the plaster. But the point is that if you look at the other toes, there's good connection to the forefoot. There aren't the squared off toes like you see in the Wallaces. And I think that feature has been exaggerated. In the carvings, in imitation of this, I wouldn't be surprised. We know that the Wallaces had a cleaned up copy of the 15-inch track that they got from Bob Titmus. Shorty acknowledged that at one point. And I wouldn't be surprised if Al had, if they'd gotten a copy or had access to a copy. Al says that he probably has made about 100 copies of that cast over the years as people have requested copies of it. Okay. Another point. Here's these unfortunately have gotten a lot of press as well. These are the quote cleaned up tracks that Bob Titmus, where he took two of the 15-inch tracks and just to make them aesthetically more cleaned up, smoothed off the surface, and in the process I think made them look much more blocky and bulky than they really are. In fact, I know that. Oh, I don't have that slide. No, missed a slide. If you can go down to the Willow Creek Museum and look at those originals upon which these cleaned up versions were based. They're not as blocky. The contours are much more natural looking, and they're very satisfying to observe. Now, how many of you remember this from Ivan Sanderson's book, the glossy plates in the center of Ivan Sanderson's book? Every time I saw that, I thought, man, that's got to be, and especially when I learned about, that's got to be the clearest track I've ever seen. And I thought, in Sanderson's caption, he talked about an Beaumont track in clay. And so I'm imagining somebody finding a nice big deposit of clay. We used to find them when I was a kid, and we'd mine them out and take them home, and that was our Play-Doh at the time. But a Sasquatch had just happened to step in the perfect substrate to make an absolutely clear track. Well, that's not the case at all. This is a cropped-in photograph of the mold of the cleaned-up footprint that Bob made. And there it is. I mean, we went through Bob's things. I was able to, in fact, these casts that I had in my collection were made from that mold. And that mold is made out of plaster. And to pull a cast from that, he had a can still sitting there next to it of axle grease. And you take the axle grease and you'd work it into the plaster of the mold really well. And John said, go ahead and do it. And so I put the grease on, poured the plaster in, and waited for a while, and then crossing my fingers, took the rubber mallet that was there and carefully started whapping on this to separate it. And they popped out, amazingly. I didn't try to think, what would I do if it cracked or broke the mold? But this is a picture that Sanderson took of that mold, which gives it a very unnatural look to it. Okay, speaking of carved feet, we have this one, Ray Pickens from near Colville, Washington. And of course, he's the one who claimed, and he certainly did, faked a lot of tracks. And they have been, his claim to faking has been equated with the Bosberg footprints. And I know there's still lots of controversy surrounding that whole incident and the involvement of Ivan Marks. And Randy was very convinced at the time. He kind of became a little more guarded of his opinion over time. John has expressed a lot of skepticism because of Ivan Marks' involvement. But I tell you, if Ivan Marks faked these, then we might as well all go home, because we'll never be able to tell the difference between a real and a fake footprint. These are, in my opinion, amongst the best anatomical examples of a real footprint that we can come up with. And I'm running out of time. I can tell you stories about discussing these with orthopedic surgeons and others with expertise in the possible pathologies. The point I wanted to make is, first and foremost, that obviously Ray Pickens' carved feet were not responsible for these. I didn't have a scale for his, but this is approximate. They were probably about 16 inches based on the videos that he shows it. But they're often shown sideways so you can see the attached foot, or boot. But I wanted to show it straight on so you could see the anatomy. The other day, during one of the interviews I was doing, I had a series of examples out on the lab bench, and while they were juggling with the lighting and so forth, I would just sit there staring at them, and I had the Hereford cast sitting right beside a copy of the undeformed Bosberg track. And man, all of a sudden it just jumped out at me, it just hit me how similar they actually were. And so we were doing a little exercise, and Chris Murphy and I were sending some things back and forth. He was drawing some attention to another photograph, and we weren't sure if it was from the Cripplefoot Bosberg tracks, or if it was, John thought it was a photograph of tracks that Ivan Marks claimed to have found sometime later. But in any case, we were doing some superimposition, and so I thought, I'm going to do the same thing, and so I superimposed it's hard to tell. It's much better if you can fade back and forth and do this and kind of move it around. But the similarity of proportion and shape and toe configuration and outline of the sole pad between those two is so remarkably similar. It's just really quite amazing. Again, what are the chances of two people, if someone faked these tracks, and I'm sure it's not a case of copycat, someone faked these tracks and Ivan Marks faked the Bosberg tracks, what are the chances of them converging on such a remarkably natural looking anatomy that also has, I can show you other examples. We'll get to a couple of those. All right, the Patterson-Gimlin film. Now I argued that, and what I think is another reason for confidence in the Blue Creek Mountain tracks, is their remarkable similarity to the Patterson-Gimlin film subjects' footprints. And this is the pair of casts that were taken by Roger, and remarkably clear. I mean, they're gorgeous. As far as looking, you can see the toe stems, you can see the layout of the toes really nicely. You can see the ever slight hint here of the split ball, but since the toes are fully extended, you get that indication of the crease most when the toes are strongly flexed. So it's just ever slight indentation here. There's even a bulge here that corresponds to the navicular. In the very flat foot, one of those bones of the tarsus is down in contact with the ground. In us, with an arch, it's up in the air. But in a flat foot, it's down in the ground, so it leaves its own distinctive bulge right there. So again, this is, like I said, John and I kind of went back and forth on this. Part of the problem has been that this cast has been, or actually this one doesn't usually get replicated. It's the other foot that has been most replicated, and has been replicated so many times. And I can show you this in my lab. The latex molds that are used in replication tend to shrink a little bit as they age. And I have a copy of a copy of a copy that's about an inch shorter. It's about 13.5 inches instead of 14.5 inches long. And the right foot is fully the original as measured with good scale in various early representations, is a full 15 inches long, as is also indicated. And you can see there's some variation, obviously, in the resulting length of the foot, depending on the nature of the step and the condition of the substrate. So when you look at Bob Tippus's row of 10, there's some remarkable variation in the length of that. But here's that photo from John's book, and quite some time ago, I did a careful tracing to scale of those two, and the similarity is remarkable. Now, I doubt anybody in here would question the authenticity of this footprint. Now, what would be the odds again of this footprint being so remarkably similar to the tracks on the Blue Creek Mountain roadway just a month and a